thank you for coming to this presentation, and thank you for the nice introduction. I'm happy to be here. First, I would like to just ask, with a show of hands, how many people in here have tried to appear in the media at least one time? Okay, so that's like at least half of you. That's nice. And how many would like to appear more in the media to talk about animal issues? Okay, great. That makes us a lot. I would also like to ask how many people have ever felt somewhat nervous or would feel nervous with the thought of being in front of a camera and talking about this issue? That's good. Okay, so it seems that we are all on the same page to begin with. In this presentation, I will share my experiences with this topic, and hopefully I can get you on to a good start or a better continuation with your media work. Yeah, like overall, I feel that in the movement of fighting for animal rights and animal protection, I think we are missing out on a lot of media attention that we could actually use to get the word out, and that's why I think this topic is very important to become better at every day. So why should we focus on the media? Well, someone said whoever controls the media controls the minds. I'm not sure if this is entirely correct, but I think we can all agree that the media has a big power in influencing people and how they think about various subjects in the world. This was not my quote, it was this charming guy that I found through Google. Just a little bit about myself, so you know why I'm here. I've been campaigning for animals' rights for nearly a decade now, and I've done quite a lot of media work, appeared like in hundreds of times in newspapers, radio, TV, debates, whatever. Still have a lot to learn, but at least I have some experience on this topic. Yeah, I have a master degree in organizational communication, but I think I've learned most of what I've done through trial and error and just being there myself. Okay, so what I want to cover in this presentation is just three things basically, and then I hope to get on with a discussion. And I'm happy to see that so many people have already had some experience with media, because I'll be happy to hear some of your experiences also you can share, because these are just my experiences, and I'm sure that other people have found out other things that will work for other people. But I want to cover what the media is looking for, what is important to the media, that is, how can we get media access, and then finally, how can we effectively handle an interview, because that might be the most nervous-wracking experience when it comes to media. That's when you really have to get out there and tell your story, and you only have maybe one shot to make it really good. So the only good news is bad news. That's one of the headlines of the media. As you probably are aware of, the media has these news values. This is what is important to journalists. And if you Google it, you will come up with 20 or 30 news values that are all important, but I've just highlighted some of those that I think are maybe the most important, or some that we should be aware of. One of those is sensation. It has to be spectacular. It has to be like amazing, and there has to be some sort of conflict. So that is, if there's a company that is doing some bad treatment of animals, and there's a conflict because we believe something else. If we just talk about the animals and we believe it's wrong, then it's not as conflictful and not as interesting for journalists. So we can always think about how we can sort of create a conflict, because it will be more newsworthy to the journalist. Yeah. Another thing is identification, because we want to identify with the target audience, with the general public. And for some reason, they have an easier time perhaps identifying with a dog than a snake, and they will have an easier time identifying with a child rather than a dog. So we always have to keep in mind where the public, the general public is, so we can kind of talk in their terms, because otherwise we will just be talking to ourselves, and it would be auto-communication, and we're not so interested in that. So we always have to keep in mind where are like the people we're trying to talk with, and how can we actually meet them. Yes, another one is immediacy. Like, it has to be something that is going on now, ideally. And how do we do that if we talk about factory farming, like the conditions of the animals are more or less the same and has been like that for 10 or 20 years, and It may continue to be like that for the next 10 or 20 years, hopefully not, but it could be. And how do we make that news? Well, we have to come up with new angles all the time. So there could be a new study that points out that so and so many % of pigs have these and these problems, and then you can take the whole story up again. I talked to someone here from France about the foie gras industry, and last year they sent out a press release about some problems with the male ducks in the foie gras industry, and it got almost no coverage. And then again this year they tried it again, but this time the difference was that some MPs, some politicians, 35 of them or whatever, they had the discussions about this issue, and then suddenly the exact same message, the exact same problem suddenly got a lot of attention. So, and the only difference was that you had like an angle to it. So always when you do media work, try to think of the angle, and the angle has to be immediate, and it also has to be, the next one is proximity, it has to be something close to you, ideally. So, I mean, if 1,000 people die in the Far East, it's not as interesting as if one person breaks her leg or her neck in your neighborhood. And the same goes with animal cruelty. If it's just in your neighboring country, it's so much harder to get it in the media. I'm sure some of you have tried to do that, and sometimes you succeed, but oftentimes you won't succeed. So you need to have some kind of angle to your own country. So if there is some animal cruelty going on in, say, Germany, and you live in Austria, then you might find out that, oh, actually some of the German meat is imported to Austria and it's been sold in this supermarket. Then you have the conflict, you have the sensation, you have the proximity, and you have the identification, because also the target group, they also want to see that it's something that's important to me, and it's maybe the meat that I buy that comes from cruel farms and not the meat that the Germans buy. So you really have to serve it, like, and that's a lot of the media work, and maybe if you're beginning at this, you just think, oh, it's all wrong what is being done to animals, and you just want to tell the story from scratch. But this is not so much about telling the story from scratch, rather than kind of collecting the story and make it appealing to people, let's say, outside the animal rights circles, people who don't think so much about this, and it's like, oh, this is happening in front of me. Okay, it has something to do with my day-to-day life. That's why I should be interested in it. I don't care what goes on in other countries about other species and these kind of things. So you really have to make it near. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. This is what the press wants, ideally. And I'm sure we could go into more details about that. But if you understand this, then I think you're onto a really, really good start in getting your message out. So, getting your story out. How do you do that? There are a number of ways to get your story out. I will just come up with some of the most common ways. The most commonly used method is to write a press release. This is how it looks when I write my press releases. Nice setting, and just take your time. No. Actually, what you need to do first before writing a press release, you need to have a press list. So if you don't have that, you should make one of those. Like in Denmark, I think we have a press list with more than 100 contacts, and it's just you find it on like the big newspapers, TV stations. You just gather all of them. They usually all have like a press email, and then you have a press list, and then you should. I'm losing count here. Okay, I will bring an example of a press, because instead of just explaining it, I think I should show you one. Probably you can't read this. I'm just gonna walk you through. This is just a draft that I was part of making in Fur Free Alliance, because we had this story that Hugo Boss was becoming fur free. It was a good story, and what you want to have is you want to have a headline that explains the story very shortly. So Hugo Boss commits to a fur-free policy. Okay, that's good. That's kind of a sensation, because Hugo Boss is a well-known brand. If it wasn't a well-known brand, you might make the title a little more like sensational, like breaking news or something like this is never seen before. Or something. But it shouldn't be too clickbaiting, because otherwise the journalist will kind of figure out that's kind of weird. But when you have a really good story, then you don't need to kind of like push it up so much. So it goes on to say you need to have a date, and then the Fur Free Alliance praises luxury brand Hugo Boss for phasing out all real animal fur. The progressive decision came after discussions between Hugo Boss and the Fur Free Alliance. So in the beginning of the press release, you should really write what the story is about. This is not a novel where you kind of give a little bit and then at the end you will understand what it's about. It's actually the upside down. So ideally you would want to be able to cut the message and eliminate the bottom part, and you would still be able to understand what the whole thing is about. So don't wait for the best to the last. Give the best in the beginning, actually, because otherwise they get like hundreds of press releases and they'll be like, oh, what is this? Okay, never mind, and then you lost your chance. Then what you need, like the text that you write, just a statement of fact should be facts, and then you have the quotes. So when you have the quotes, then you can come up with your opinions. That's where you can be a little bit more like experimental with your language and can be more like day-to-day talking, can be more sensational also. I think this one is maybe not the most sensational, like the chairman of Fur Free Alliance says. Hugo Boss has become a leader in the fashion world by taking a stand against animal cruelty and ending its fur sales. The Fur Free Alliance hopes other luxury brands will follow Hugo Boss' leads, especially since there are now so many cruelty-free alternatives that are fashionable and indistinguishable from the real thing. But anyway, it's like, this is a really big thing. That's the opinion. And then to give it some more credibility, there's also a statement from Hugo Boss saying that today we are successfully supplying friendly fur and friendly leather products, and we want to use these products to inspire the present generation, especially the next generation, with a new kind of luxury. And then after that, to give it more like appeal and more like identification and more like importance, there's a list of other brands that are also fur-free, just to say that this is a common thing and this is the way the world is going. So Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, Stella McCartney, Zara and Essos are also fur-free. Then what you also need to include is further information. So if some journalists have more questions, there would have to be a contact person. Often it would be the person quoting, but it could also be someone else who has more expertise on this particular subject. So phone and email and name. And then what you can do at the bottom of your press release, you can have some additional information. So in this case, maybe the Fur Free Alliance brand is not as well known as PepsiCo or Coca-Cola. So it's nice to give the journalist a little bit of background information. And often you can be lucky that they will include some of the background information into their article, so they don't have to Google it first. So some people may be of the impression that journalists are really like sharp people who has all the time in the world to kind of find the story. But in today's world, they're so busy and they don't have time to do all the background research. So you actually have to present it to them. Don't think that the journalists will find out for themselves. Sometimes they do, most of the times they don't, simply because they don't have the time. So the more you can feed them with information beforehand, the better. But of course, you don't have to like over-inform them, because then they will not read it. So you really have to decide what is the most important. What you could also include in the bottom could be links to like pictures or video, and then you can just say, well, photo credit or video credit our group or whoever made the video, and maybe just state that it's free to use for everyone, because some journalists may be a little bit like, oh, is there like some copyright, or are we allowed to use it? So if you just say it's free to use for all or something like that, then there's a bigger chance that they will just post it. And one picture says more than 1,000 words, so if you can get some nice pictures in, that is going to move people also. Okay, let me see. Yes, also when you send out your press releases, you might sometimes segment it a bit. So if it's a really local story, don't send it out to your whole press list, because you might be spamming them. So it should be relevant to them, otherwise don't send it. So sometimes you have some really big national things and you think this could be for everyone, and you would send it out to the big list. Sometimes it would be about this particular subject, and you will only send it out to like a selected list. So another little tip is because often you would send the press release maybe to channel 1 or whatever, and in channel 1 there are maybe 50 or 100 journalists, and you never know which one would pick it up. So whenever you see that a new journalist has picked it up, it would usually be in the top of the article written by John Smith or whatever. You could often find the email address of that person, and it's just a good habit after it has been printed to just write a short 2-line email saying, well, thank you for the coverage. Would you like to be on our press list in the future? And then you could add that person personally on your press list. I think at least 4 out of 5 times they will say yes. That's my experience if you come to them in a polite way. And then there's a bigger chance that they will pick it up in the future because they actually get it directly. Whereas normally they would have to go to a special inbox to see what came into their company. Yes. So that was a press release. If you have a few questions during the talk, you're welcome, but otherwise afterwards there will be, yes? Yes. Yes, how to get the email. Very often it would be like a hyperlink, so there will be the name of the journalist, and if you just scroll your button or the arrow of your mouse, you will see what the email is. Very often, not always. Otherwise, you would have to kind of Google the person. But I would say in most instances, you can find it just in the article. Okay, so part 2 of getting your story out. You can pitch your story for, yes?
There's actually a question. About this. It looks really nice, but I've seen some of the other press releases you've done. You put in a lot of pictures and
yes.
A really nice design.
Yes. The design and layout is a question, good question. This is only a text version, so this looks very ugly if you send it out like this, obviously. So it could be a good idea to have these kind of picture ways, so you get a nice picture in the top, and then you get the text, and you can see what the story is about. There could be a fox from a fox farm or whatever the story was about. And then, but in that case, I think you should send it out. I'm not so technical. That's my colleague. Maybe he can emphasize on that if needed. But you should send it out in 2 versions, so the people who can get it, is it HTML or whatever, they can get it like that. And then there's also a text version for people who don't want to open these images. So, but I think most people open it with images. So to bring images is usually a good idea. At least that's our experience. Okay, so pitching your story for a solo. Yeah, we want to develop a relationship, not that kind of relationship, but a professional relationship with the journalists who write our stories. And when we have some journalists that we actually trust, then we can pitch the stories for solos. Solo stories are when the journalists get it before all the other journalists, so they can have it as their own story. And that's very important for many journalists. They don't want to report what other medias do all the time. They also want to have their own, so they can brand themselves as being the one who found out about this animal cruelty or about whatever, Paris Hilton's new haircut or whatever. So if you have a really big story, it can be good to make it to a solo first and say, well, because it gives you time to give the journalist some background information and gather all the things and get all the questions. If you have a more complicated story, then Hugo Boss goes for free, maybe like new undercover investigation shows this or that, then the journalist might have a lot of questions, and you would have to do maybe some research for the journalist, and it's good to meet with that person and give that. And then afterwards, the other journalist would probably quote from that one. So make sure that it's like a good news outlet that you go to, not a very small one. You would have to, it would be one of the quoted media outlets. Alternatively, it can also be good for solo if it's not wide enough for all media. So it's just like, this journalist is usually interested in this topic, but the others are not so interested. And then instead of sending it out as a broad press release, then maybe it's better to just say, well, I got this story. Because the problem is, if you send it out as a press release, then it's only relevant for one day. Like, no press releases are taken the day after. Almost never happens. But if you write an email or call the journalist on the phone saying, well, we'll have this story, then the journalist might be able to schedule and say, okay, maybe next week I have time to do this story. And then it's not old news. But it's old news if it has already been sent out, and then they're not interested anymore, unfortunately. Yeah, I think that was what I had to say about this. Okay, so another one. Write your own opinion piece or letter to the editor. This is a very simple thing that everyone could do. Just if there is a debate going on about animal rights, animal welfare, whatever, then it would be a good time to write your own opinion about it. What you need to look after is what are the formalities of word counts, and you can find that on most newspapers' websites. They will say, okay, we have these 3 options. You can write a long one, a short one, and you really have to like accept these kind of rules, because that's how much space they have in their newspaper. And it's very varying. It can be anything from like 50 words to 1,000 words, something like that. So think of that beforehand. And then what happens is maybe you try to go for the long one and it's rejected. Then you can kind of edit it a little bit and send it on to another one. So you don't have to only make one shot. You can make several shots, and you can try for the biggest newspaper first and then the second biggest. And I think we actually miss a lot of opportunities in this sense. And if you're really good at writing, then you should consider, instead of going to the next circus demo or something else, and spend those 2 hours writing a really good piece, and you could reach maybe 50,000 people with that opinion. This example is just about a guy who doesn't like animals, but I thought it was a little bit fun. Beware of the cuddly killer seal. Animals have not just multiplied, they've lost their fear of man. Not so nice. Let me see. Sometimes it also happens, if you have an organization, that a journalist will call you up and ask for your opinion about some animal issue going on. And it can be both a very nice experience, and it can also be a little bit troubling. It's really nice if it's a story that you know something about and that you're happy to share with the public. And then you're like, yes, finally. But sometimes you will also get some really difficult or weird questions, and you're like, oh my, what am I going to answer about some people like walking on a dead whale on the beach? And you're like, I've never had that question before. And then you're like, just give me a minute, I will talk to the whale expert or whatever. Like, so sometimes you need to buy yourself a bit of time because you're not prepared. Like when you send out a press release, you're always prepared, and you might have made some notes, and you know the topic in all senses, and you know all the questions. But sometimes you just get a question about snake farms in Uruguay or whatever, and you've never maybe had any experience with that, but you don't want to tell the journalist up front, I don't know anything about it. You'll be like, I'm just going to check up with my colleague, or I'm in a meeting right now and I will get back to you. But anyway, you have to get back very quickly, and you have to make sure that you get all the info before you hang up on the phone. You want to know, okay, exactly what is the story about, and often the journalist will be nice to say, well, there is this going on, and this celebrity says this, but the industry says that, and what is your opinion? Often they want to have this conflict, like the company says everything is fine, do you believe that, or do you have any evidence proving otherwise? And I mean, you could also just be honest and say, well, this is a very specific question. I would have to do a little bit of investigation and research, and I will call my colleagues in Germany because I know everything about that or whatever. So, and journalists will also be like receptive for this because they're kind of Googling and they don't know, and they have a little bit of time, and if you offer your time, say, okay, I will spend 2 hours figuring this out for you, and I can send you a quote, and I can send you the information, and oftentimes the journalist will be happy. So I would say most of the time this is very positive, and this also happens if you've been successful in the past of getting your stories out, because then you are sort of on the media list. Oh, this is this group, they have a lot of opinions on fur animals, factory farmed animals, animals in entertainment or whatever. And this could be an argument for trying to reach more topics, but it could also be an argument for not doing it if you're not interested in getting like so diluted and trying to cover everything at once. So it's kind of a thing you have to make up with yourself. Are you this kind of group organization that can comment on 50 different topics, or do you only want to focus on one? And then you would just maybe refer the journalist and say, oh, this is not our topic, but you should call my colleague in this other group. And then you can kind of refer each other. And that's a really nice collegial thing to do, to just pass a journalist on to the best person if you're not the right person. Yeah, I think that's it. So, the interview, that can be the nervous, provoking experience. So, how do you do that? So, there are like different numbers of interviews. Like the simple one is just you send out a press release, a journalist calls you for additional quotes. That might be in the easy end because you already wrote the press release, you already know what you think, and you probably know the case, you know about Hugo Boss and the other companies that don't sell fur anymore. But sometimes you also have to go on a debate, or you would go in a radio interview, and this is a little bit more difficult because you have more time, and it's not just one quote for one article that they need a lot of things. So, how do you prepare for that? Well, you prepare, and you spend a lot of time preparing. At least that's what I do, and it helps me a lot because I've tried in the past not preparing so much because I think, oh yeah, I know about this, and then suddenly you find yourself forgetting everything, and what are the facts, and how do I respond to this negative critical question? And if you get nervous, then you kind of shut down and forget everything. So what you want to do is, just like I done with this presentation, write out a few pieces of paper with first of all your main punchlines, your main ideas, the main facts that you want to get back to. So ideally in any story you only have maybe 2 or 3 really strong arguments that you want to put forward. You don't need to have like 20 or 25, and by the way, and some people also think, and I've heard that in one country this happens, and I mean, that's not the exercise here. The exercise is get back to your main points whenever possible. So the journalist might ask a lot of negative questions, especially if it's just if it's a debate with an industry person, then the industry person will be the not so nice guy. But if there's no industry person, then the journalist will often take that role and ask a lot of negative questions. So can you be sure that this is true, or is this really how it's going on, or isn't this just some kind of Disney-like fairy tale you're kind of and don't get like off track because of these questions, because that's just the role of the journalist to kind of balance things. They will do the same to the industry, say, well, isn't the animal welfare really poor? And then the industry person will be, no, it's the best in the world, and we do everything, and we're so nice. And you just do the same. Like, you have your script, or whatever you would call it. You have your talking points. It's like you should prepare it as if you were helping maybe the prime minister going on this press meeting, and you would be prepared for all the questions that could come up from the court, and just, okay, if you get this question, you reply this. If you get this question, you reply this. And if you have all these questions ready and all your answers ready, then you don't feel so nervous anymore, because you know, okay, this is where I'm getting. And even if you get a difficult question, you will just start replying in this sense, and then you kind of switch back to your main arguments, so you don't get sidetracked too much. What you also want to do, which is very important, and I think we've also talked about this in other presentations, like this is not just about facts and figures and, well, 2 million pig live on farms and blah, 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 this is wrong or this is good. It's more like trying to paint some pictures, because if you don't have images to show, you should be the one showing the images in the way you describe things. So you want to describe how, if it's pigs on factory farms, how they're being castrated, how they live in very confined conditions. So you actually get the viewer or the reader to imagining themselves being there, because you need to move kind of the emotions for empathy and understanding the issue on a deeper emotional level, rather than just throwing out facts and figures, because facts and figures normally doesn't move us so much. It's just like, oh yeah, that's bad, move on. But it's like, if you can imagine this one pig or this one hen or this one furry animal, then you will understand it a little bit better. And don't try to overdo it, so you're kind of telling a fairy tale about this animal named John. Well, if there is an animal named John and it's a good story, then of course you can mention it. But yeah, try to find a really good way in which you kind of describe the issue, so people can imagine themselves being there and understanding it. Okay. So, part 2 with the interview, be a pro. So, how do you do that? And this is especially if you're on the camera. You want to dress nice. You don't want to wear a black hoodie and look angry, even if you feel a little bit angry about the topic. You want to show a nice face, because people want to listen to friendly and likable people, and they don't want to follow like people who are a little bit mad. So be nice. Also, don't get upset unless there is a really, really strong reason. Like, I would say maybe once in a while being a little bit upset if you get a really nasty question or something can show some strength, but I would say in 95% of the time it's easier to just shake it off and be nice and, yeah, that's a good one. But the topic is this, and this is the problem. Know what you want. That refers back to your talking points or your script. Really, like, get back to that, because sometimes if you are in a long debate, then suddenly the topic will just drift off to something completely different, and you need to get it back on track. It's your reality, and you have to kind of decide what is the important topic, what is the agenda, and especially if you're an industry person, they will talk about all kinds of other things, and we do all these kind of other things, and we are so nice, and you have to be, no, the problem is the animals are in these cages, and these are the problems, and these are the feelings, these are the stress that we inflict on them. Stay cool. That also refers to don't get sidetracked. Stay on your path. And the other one is don't overestimate the interviewer. So that is, journalists will have all these kind of questions, as I mentioned, and sometimes we can think that, oh, maybe they know something that I don't, or maybe I said something wrong. But often they will just ask these kind of questions because they have maybe a list of 3 or 4 questions that they will go through, and don't think that they know more than you. Very rarely they do. Most times you are the expert, and you have to kind of show that you are the expert. And even if you get the same questions 2 or 3 times, don't think that you have to come up with a different answer. Maybe you just come up with the same answer in a slightly different way, so you kind of respect the person questioning, but you give away the same answer. Unless you come up with a better answer, then you can give that. So, critical questions. I think I've kind of gotten into it already, but it can feel like you're like in the witness bench in a courthouse and you're being cross-examined. You'll get these questions. So how can you be sure? Isn't this just propaganda? Or the industry says this is all a lie, and you're like, what should I do? What should I do? But the thing is, you should just don't take the bait and turn it around to your strengths. So it's really the same point I have here. Get back to your main points. Yeah, I'm also in a timer. It's good. I'm on time. Yeah. So don't take the bait. And also another thing is don't take the questions too literally. So sometimes the journalists will also ask questions. They don't know why they ask them, because they just need to come up with a question. So they might be, oh, is this a common thing, blah, blah, blah. And maybe that was not the question you were looking for. You're like, oh, yeah, but actually, and then you get back to your thing. So like, and this is counterintuitive, because when we talk to like our friends or colleagues or whatever, we tend to always kind of respond to that particular question you're being asked. But if it's a journalist, I mean, most times you would answer that particular question, but oftentimes you would kind of track it back to your agenda. Because otherwise you can get totally sidetracked by weird questions, and maybe they didn't know what were the important questions in this topic, and you know what the important questions are. So I've even heard one person saying the way to respond should be, no, that's not the question. The real question is this, and then you come up with a reply. But I don't know how well that works all the time, but it could be worth a try. Okay, so now I want to just show one example. Maybe how many have seen this interview from The Tonight Show? Okay, some of you. It's Gene Bauer from Farm Sanctuary, and I think he kind of he does very well have a few comments afterwards, but just see how he kind of meets the interviewer and how he acts nice and actually gets the message across in a nice and friendly way. And I think I had some problems with it, so I'm just going to open it from here.
Welcome back, my guest tonight. He is the president and co-founder of Farm Sanctuary. His new book is called Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, the ultimate guide to eating mindfully, living longer, and feeling better every day. Please welcome to the program, Mr. Gene Bauer. Sir. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm delighted to see you here. You guys do incredible work. But before we get into the whole thing on Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, the book, explain just very briefly, what is Farm Sanctuary?
Farm Sanctuary is an organization that works to protect farm animals from the cruelty of factory farming. Mm-hmm. We operate sanctuaries where the animals get to live out their lives. And these are animals that have literally been thrown in trash cans or on piles of dead animals. And so we just take care of them. They're our friends, not our food. And we encourage people just to think about the way we live and eat and to make more mindful choices.
It's harder to eat meat when you know the animal's name.
So
I
true.
have found.
So true, yeah.
Because look, on the one side, this eating mindfully and vegan seems to be the solution to nutrition, to health, to global warming.
Yes, absolutely.
On the other side, corned beef.
Well, there's habits.
How do we bridge that gap?
Well, there are now meatless meats that can taste a lot like corned beef. And yeah, they can.
All right.
Yeah, and they're getting better every year. And it's getting easier and easier than it's ever been. And there are actually companies that have been set up to create plant-based meats that have a very similar mouthfeel, a similar texture and taste. And
can I get?
But you can also eat beans. You don't need to eat that stuff either.
Because if I were to get this, will an old Jewish man yell at me while I eat it, though? That's the corned beef experience I would miss.
Yeah, that could happen. That could happen.
You know, it's interesting. So the Dietary Council just released, I mean, on the heels of this book, that this vegan lifestyle is sort of the solution to so many of the issues that are going on in the world.
We could save 70% on healthcare costs if we shifted to a whole foods, plant-based diet in this country.
Right.
We could save so much in terms of resources, water, for example. Half of the water used in this country is used to raise animals for food.
Right.
So shifting away from eating animals and eating plants would put a much lighter footprint on the planet. Global warming is a whole other thing, climate change. Animal agriculture contributes more to climate change than the entire transportation industry. So, just by shifting to eating plants, we can have enormous impacts, on animals, on the planet, and on our own well-being.
Here's what I love about this book, though. It's not, I think sometimes those who have adopted this lifestyle can sometimes get a little sanctimonious, or sometimes
we're a passionate group, for sure.
Very passionate, but can really give you the once over if they catch you throwing down a little bit of, what you call bacos. I guess you call them bacos.
There are actually bacos are vegan, believe it or not.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, this should be easy for me then.
There's a lot of things that are vegan, but you wouldn't know it. That's the other really cool thing that's happening.
Gene, I eat a bacos-based diet. I always have.
Now you can do this.
Have it on almost everything. But what I like about it is you take into account it's pragmatic.
Yeah.
You take into account that this is not an easy transition for people, that we have been raised on a certain thing. And there's a lot of things in here that talk about trying just to make small lifestyle changes that can still make a big difference.
Very true. And for example, spaghetti and meatballs. You can just do veggie meatballs.
Right.
Or put veggies in there. So that's an example of what you can do instead of hamburgers,
right.
Veggie burgers.
Right.
Or you could also just eat beans and whole foods,
right.
And veggies and fruits. And there's
or even you say, like, just do it once a week.
Once a week. Meatless Mondays is a great program.
Right.
And
Tofu Tuesday, for God's sake. We could do this all day.
We could.
What is the difficulty of this? Because you have the moral argument, that sort of this idea that these animals, we don't understand they're individuals.
They are, and they have emotional lives, they have relationships, and they want to live just like we do. They're not different than cats and dogs, right, in terms of their desire to be friends with us. And at Farm Sanctuary, and I think you've started experiencing this too, yeah, with animals, they get to know you and they start following you around. And we have turkeys at the farm who just love human companionship.
Right.
And that's something most people don't understand or recognize. And unfortunately, when these animals are being mistreated on factory farms and when we're eating them, really, there's sort of an emotional desire not to think about them.
But so you have all these arguments. Do you feel the tide changing? It seems like it's changing.
In a huge way. There's more awareness now than there's ever been before. People recognize that the way we've been eating this country is really problematic. Mm-hmm. People are suffering from heart disease, cancer. People are recognizing that climate change is a major issue we need to look at. And we can make one choice to eat plant foods instead of animal foods, and it will have an impact. And it's something everybody can do. There's a lot of things in this world we don't have a lot of control over, but what we decide to eat, each of us every day has a choice to make. And
that's maybe the one thing that's difficult for people is it would seem overwhelming. Like, do you have to cook? The one thing that we've been able to do in this society is make things convenient. Yes. You can drive up and get just poison in a box, but it's
what we got.
It's
poison
fast.
In a box.
Will this lifestyle be able to compete, or will it ever be able to compete, if it doesn't have that same kind of convenience? Or is that the next wave? Is that the next thing that's coming?
I think the convenience is coming. You have vegan fast food restaurants now that are being established around the country. Right. You have vegan meatless meats, vegan dairy products.
You got to come up with a better thing than meatless meats, because that just in terms of sloganeering, we got to do it. I have a delicious meatless meat. Well, that's the next, I think.
And non-dairy milks too. Like, you go to mainstream grocery stores, there's alternatives to cow's milk everywhere. So it's getting a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm a Lactaid man. I don't know what they can do for that, but that's. Have I shared too much already with the audience? Is that? It's really a terrific book. It lays it out so simply and incredibly, and then tons of great recipes. I really appreciate it. You guys are doing phenomenal work at Farm Sanctuary, and this book is great as well. So, get it! Living the Farm Sanctuary life.
Yes, I think that was a prime example of how to be in the media. He's nice and friendly. He gets a lot of information out, and he's not getting upset with the jokes. Actually, just continues with his agenda, and really, really good performance. If I were to like comment on like just 2 small improvements in my, I can criticize now that he's not here, would be maybe to try to get a little bit more information about how the animals live on factory farms. It's kind of, because it's a really nice interview, and that's probably why he doesn't do it, because the interviewer, I think he has a vegan wife or something like that, Jon Stewart, so he knows that this guy, he knows what we're talking about. And then in that second, I think maybe he forgets a little bit about some of the general audience who has never seen factory farmed images or don't think about in that moment. So just a little bit about pigs are being castrated, and that's why it's nice at Farm Sanctuary, where we have these free roaming animals and we get to know them. So that would be one way. And then the other thing is he gets into this meat reducement with the Meat Free Mondays, and then he talks again about all these vegan substitutions. And if it was me, I would turn it around and talk more about the meat reduction, because that's where most people are. They can see themselves eating less meat, but they don't think about vegan ice cream so much. So maybe I would cut that out and just talk about, and you can also go entirely vegan if you want. But maybe that's a matter of preference. But I think it's about meeting your audience where they are, and most audience don't think of themselves as going vegan today. They might think of themselves eating more vegan food, and that's a kind of slight difference in the way you say it, but maybe it will appeal more to more people. Coming towards the end, if you are working with media or want to like just have some more advice or share some experience afterwards, just come and look me up. I'll be happy to help. Yeah, let's have some questions and comments. Why is media so important? Because it controls the minds of people, maybe. No, but it's really important that we actually focus, like as a movement, on where we can have the biggest impact. I think most of us agree on that. We want to be effective, and I mean, just one example of like how we can do it also in our day-to-day life. Like if we do street actions, we can also think about how can we get media on that, so we don't just only consider those 100 people that we touch that day, because if we can also get it in the media, we could touch maybe another 5,000 or 10,000 people. So I think it's something that we should all, maybe not all of us, but more of us should think about, or could we get some good media out of this action? I think a lot of people, they do some really fantastic work out there, and then they only share it maybe in their own magazine or on their own social media, because they are not confident or they're not sure how to actually reach the wider masses. And then often we kind of just communicate to the same pool of people who agree more and more, and which is nice, but we also want to touch the rest of the maybe 90% who are not so much into these issues as we are. And like I talked to someone here who is also like doing this very simple street action with exotic skins. It's a PETA campaign, and they just do the same one. You just need like a few people, and they're taking on some costumes, and then they do it like in every country, hooking up with local activists, and then they get media in every city. So instead of just holding the same protest in front of one first store every Wednesday and Friday, you might want to switch a little bit or do it in a more creative way, so it actually becomes sensational. That's another like real life story. Like last month, a journalist called us up because it was Fashion Week, asking if we had like a good story. And we were like, well, yeah, we actually have this about Hugo Boss. It was just after that, and we want to like deliver some flowers and say congratulations, because it's part of a bigger story. And there are also this big magazine, like department store that has stopped selling fur and these other brands, and it's actually a really good story, and it's a positive one. And what happened, it wasn't a story because it was too positive. So it's like, you can see the headline, "Man delivers flowers to store." And it's like, that's kind of boring. So and that's sometimes the irony with the media, because it's so negativity focused, and we can deliver negativity, but it shouldn't be too negative, because then we just come across as stupid people. So we should kind of find the right blend, the right in between, where we actually point out some negative, but also gives it a positive twist afterwards. Oh, there is a solution. You can stop buying fur. You can eat vegetables tonight or whatever. So in that sense, then you, on the other hand, you will be maybe half naked on the street doing a protest, and the media will be there, and then they will be like, oh, isn't this ridiculous that you have to do all this to, and then you will be like, well, that's because if we do something else, you won't cover it. But you can reply that you will be like, no, this is important, and it starts people's imaginations about this issue. So yeah. Okay, I'm told that we are over time. So I would like to thank all of you for being here. Please just come and talk to me afterwards.